So in this video, I want to cover why dismissive avoidant attachment styles go stone cold silent after a breakup. And of course, this can definitely apply as well after an argument, but we're specifically going to talk about this in the context of the relationship ending. So let's say, for example, that the DA breaks up with you, you break up in an argument, or you intentionally break up with a dismissive avoidant. And what you'll often find from a dismissive avoidant attachment style, by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with dismissive avoidant attachment styles, they're one of four major attachment styles, one of three of which are insecurely attached. And they tend to sort of be characterized as being the individuals who are slower to warm up, more afraid of commitment, more afraid of deep connection. And a lot of this comes from having emotional neglect in childhood, which essentially stunts their emotional growth in that area in their adult lives and causes them to want to avoid being sort of rejected for the emotional version of themselves as they felt rejected that way in childhood. So, without going too far down that rabbit hole, because there's lots of other videos on this channel in regards to that, dismissive avoidants tend to go stone cold silent after a breakup for three major reasons. The first one is that, let's say they get broken up with by you, as an example. Immediately, it makes them very aware of how vulnerable they feel. And the number one coping mechanism of dismissive avoidance when they feel vulnerable is to try to disconnect from and repress their feelings as far away as possible. And so, if you look at dismissive avoidance in their childhood and in their upbringing, when they constantly had emotional neglect in their experience, the way that they learned to create relief and adapt to that situation was to minimize how much they allowed themselves to experience their own emotional feelings. They learned this part of myself is worthy of rejection. So I'm just going to reject it altogether first. So I don't end up trying to get connection with this part of myself with a caregiver and then just feel like it's rejected in my outside world. So as a means of adapting to that challenging situation and creating relief for themselves, they try to disconnect from or repress their emotions. So the moment there's a breakup, because breakups are going to make us feel things, it's very inevitable, especially in longer term relationships. So we have an aspect of grief that happens when we go through a breakup because we've interconnected our internal reality with the internal reality of another person. And as that dislodges and breaks apart, there's an aspect of feeling this loss of a part of ourselves to a certain degree, especially in longer term relationships. So dismissive avoidance as a means to not have to feel those feelings try to do everything they can to just disconnect from anything that is going to remind them that they feel those feelings as a whole. And that is their way to try to create relief for themselves. And dismissive avoidants are generally very good at compartmentalizing. So, what you'll essentially see is as a means to not have to feel, they try to keep you as far away as possible because you are the person in this context or situation that could catalyze them feeling their feelings, which scares them and which they also don't really have great modeling for how to work through, right? It's not like a securely attached person where they know, okay, I have unmet needs and I'm going to go meet my needs after a breakup, or I have fears, and I'm going to challenge those fears and question them and not let them dictate my experience and produce this emotional output. Instead, dismissive avoidants tend to feel like, okay, I've got this really uncomfortable situation here. I don't know how to work through it. So I'm just going to deny and sort of repress that part of myself. So reason number one, they go stone cold silent is because they were trying to get you as far away as possible in order to get any emotions that you could make them feel as far away as possible. Okay. And that's their coping mechanism or strategy. Number two, unfortunately, dismissive avoidants also shame that part of themselves because so let's say you're a child and you grew up in a household where there's emotional neglect. As a child, you can't conceive of something like, oh, my parents are emotionally unavailable to me, and that's why I'm in pain. As a child who yearns for attachment and attunement and connection from your caregivers, when that is not there consistently enough, instead, your mind makes it mean because the child mind personalizes everything. And instead, the mind will make it mean, oh, there must be something wrong with or defective about me that I can't get those needs met from my caregivers. Like, I want this, I'm trying to get their attention, I'm trying to connect with them, and they're not really able to do that with me. And so that must be me. I must be the one that's defective or not normal, or something must be wrong with me at my core that this is the problem. And so unfortunately, the emotional aspect of self is a part of the self that dismissive avoidance will tend to characterize in their internal world as being weak, shameful, defective, embarrassing, wrong. They tend to really think that even though that part of themselves is like unsafe. And so it just sort of allows this like further layer of them trying to keep themselves down, and that part of themselves down that could feel, or expose that part of themselves to somebody else in a relationship. So we've got step one, they repress, but step two, even if they are feeling something, they think that that part of themselves is only ever even further worthy of rejection, especially from others, because that was their conditioned experience in their upbringing. And so when there's a breakup, the very last thing they're going to want to do on the planet is expose that part of themselves to the person that's already making them feel bad feelings. And I'm not saying that because it's the person making them feel bad feelings. Like, breakups naturally induce those feelings. There's two sides to that experience. That's definitely not me like blaming the other person or anything like that, just to be clear. But that's what their internal reality perceives, right? That's their experience and what they're sort of expecting and imagining. And so it's like, I don't want to feel my own feelings, let alone expose my feelings that are only ever going to get shamed and rejected by somebody else, because that is the only experience I really know in my conditioning from my upbringing. So it's like they tend to assume that if they did expose that part of themselves, they were vulnerable, they did reach out, anything like that, it's just going to lead to more negative outcomes because that's what their experience has historically been. So before I go to point number 3 here, if you are going through a breakup, whether it's a breakup of like a long-term relationship, a situationship, just dating somebody for a while, any form of that, one thing you need to know is that we don't grieve the physical body of a person. Like, yes, we can miss physical touch, we can miss cuddling, we can miss attraction that comes in regards to like the biological aspects of attraction, but it's really like when we're really grieving the needs somebody was meeting in our lives, the traits they brought into our lives or brought out in us. Maybe they made us feel like we were smart or like we could do it, like we were capable because they encouraged us, right? So there's needs, there's traits. Then breakups hurt because we tell really painful stories about them. And we look at generally more of the negative after a breakup instead of looking at, hey, how can we be more for the solution in this next chapter or season of life rather than focusing on the problem. There tends to be really important ways of doing that. Now, I have a course you can check out for free for 7 days. If you're going through any kind of breakup, you're having a tough time getting over somebody from the past, it helps you target those 4 main issues so that you're actually moving through the things that are causing you to feel grief. And it's going to take that initial sting out of the breakup by like 50%. Yes, you'll have to like get needs met and develop new strategies, and there will still be like this discomfort, but you'll be able to really get that massive, like really uncomfortable feeling of like rumination or frustration or regret, sadness, overwhelm, all those things just out of the way by going through those 4 key steps in that course. And again, you can check it out for free for 7 days using the link below. It's definitely more than enough time to get through that course and just help you along your journey if you need it. So the third major reason that dismissive avoidant attachment styles tend to go stone cold silent after a breakup is also because they cope by minimizing their attachment needs to other people. So when they feel unsafe, out of control, when they feel uncertain about something, when things are kind of up in the air, their major coping mechanism is to minimize needing anything from anybody else and becoming hyper self-reliant in order to best navigate and move through that situation. And that's not everybody's way of coping, right? More anxious leaning individuals tend to sort of want to pair up with other people and connect with maybe friends, family, after a breakup and reach out for support or closure. They tend to want to get needs met from people to sort of bring them that sense of comfort. Dismissive avoidants have been conditioned forever to go in the exact opposite direction. So they tend to want to convince themselves they don't need the person. It wasn't the right person. Let's focus on all the person's flaws, why it wouldn't have worked out anyways. And they tend to really minimize their attachment needs to somebody else in order to cope. And they can convince themselves of that for quite some time. One sort of unique thing about dismissive avoidance you'll tend to see is that they often are really good at doing that for quite a period of time, but often like somewhere between 6 weeks to 3 months, they may actually sort of start letting their feelings back up and start sort of second guessing some of the ways they minimize their attachment strategy. And sometimes they even have this like delayed reaction to grieving a breakup. But in that early sort of stage there, they go stone cold silent because they spend all this time trying to cope from a breakup by telling themselves all the stories and all the things about why it wasn't going to work, why that wasn't the right person, and why they need that space. So when you take those three things together, you can see why it's so easy for a dismissive avoidant to go stone cold silent. It doesn't necessarily reflect like how much they cared or how little they cared. It doesn't necessarily reflect like, if they're thinking about you or not thinking about you, because they would do everything they could to not show it anyways. It doesn't necessarily reflect how much they miss somebody in a relationship. It reflects how they cope in order to best survive a breakup, and what works for them in order to essentially make themselves feel okay. So I hope this makes a lot of sense. I got a lot of questions about this. It's a really great topic. Let me know any other questions you have down in the question section below, or in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this channel, please consider subscribing. I put daily content out here every single day about the subconscious mind, relationships, attachment theory, you name it, all emotional regulation, subconscious reprogramming, all that exciting stuff. So if you don't want to miss any, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.